guys, welcome to round 24 of the West Life podcast. Just 2 rounds to go. We're still in top 8 contention. I'm going to go through the mathematical equations and results and how things can sway over the next 2 weekends and what's going to happen for us to make the top 8 later in the show. As always, follow us at West Life Pod on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook as well. We shared a bit of video content today, a bit of a flashback. Benji carving up the Titans at Campbelltown, much like he did in our great win on the weekend against the Knights. Whoever went out there, the 11,000 people amongst us, it was nice to go to a game that a result was basically out of hand early on, and fingernails still intact. And thanks to the West Tigers also for having the post-match function at Campbelltown. The boys did a signing session, so if you missed out on that, highly recommend next time they do that to attending. It's always good when they get a win beforehand. Most of the time when they seem to have a after-match function at Campbelltown, it's usually after a loss, but be as it may. So as well as my mathematical explanations of the season, we've got news and a preview, and the news is up first. Just a little bit of news going around this week. The All-Star game is returning to the Gold Coast. If you didn't see that, you probably don't care, but the first game of rugby league next year will be in February on the Gold Coast, the Indigenous All-Stars versus the New Zealand Maori All-Stars. So Benji might take part in that, as will Isan, so we'll probably be craving a bit of footy by then. But the All-Star game back to Robina. The boys did a bit of junior club training during the week out in the southwestern Sydney. The photos getting around was pretty cool. A lot of the boys, running sessions and teaching young kids coming through. And like I've said many times in the past, you can't fault what these boys do off the field. On the field, so signings, apparently NRL.com are saying Kevin Walters' son Billy, who's a young 5'8", coming through the Storm system. He's about to sign with us, so he's likely to be Benji's replacement in 2021. That goes with the 2 other young gun signings we had last week. So things are looking good for probably post next year. Next year might be another mediocre season, and fingers crossed we'll have a young, exciting, fully Madge roster by 2021. And that'll look strong. The poor old Magpies, they got belted 42-14 last week by Newtown. They're out of the semi-final contention now, but it's no surprises. They're considering how many players have been promoted to first grade because of the injuries in our first grade side. So they'll play their last game against the Warriors Saturday morning, our time, and it's basically who cares for them, while the Warriors can sneak into the top 8 with a big win, and they probably will. So the Magpies season will end on Saturday. So that's it for the news for this week. Just a quick couple of minutes. My preview for round 24 is next. Right, 2 games to go, and we have our old rival, the St George Illawarra Dragons, Sunday afternoon, 4 p.m. at the SCG, the worst ground in the world to watch rugby league, in my opinion. Maybe Brookvale. Between that and Brookvale, they're both pretty rubbish, but at least at Brookvale, when you're sitting with the scum on the hill, you got a good view of the game, whereas the SCG, you need binoculars. So if you're heading to the game on Sunday, don't forget those. The team list, it's the same number-wise as it was last week, but as you may remember, Benji moved to hooker, Maddo moved to 6, Reynolds to the bench, and Eisenhuth to lock. And while they're wearing the same numbers this week, they'll probably switch to those positions as well, you would think. Quite like Benji at hooker last week. I thought he was providing good spark out of there. It seemed to work really well, and just an absolute magic decision to do that. But Yeah, I mean, these players changing numbers, as I've said in the past, I reckon NRL players should just choose their own number because they're just going to switch them around anyway. Benji should be able to pick whatever number he wants, really. The weather for Sunday, if you're heading out there, it's saying sunny and 23. It's been very rainy late this week, but it is meant to clear up if you do want to head out to the old girl, the G. Yeah, I mean, I don't care if it rains this weekend and or next week. Just please don't rain at Leichhardt on Sunday week. Fingers crossed, it is looking like it's going to be clear all week next week. But it's Leichhardt, and we usually get rained on at Leichhardt, but we'll see what happens there. My bet of the week. Now, someone posted on Twitter or Facebook, I don't know where I read it, but there are 3 boys in the team that are on nudie runs. If you don't know what a nudie run is, if you play a sport in Australia and you don't score, well, in rugby league's case, a try, by the end of the season, you have to do a lap of the field in the nude. Now, the three players on the nudie, in quotation marks, is Alex Twal, Elijah Taylor, and Tommy McKaylee. So, my bet of the week, I'm thinking these boys might be a bit of extra motivation to not want to get their private parts out in the last training session of the season is usually when they do these. Not that they do it much anymore. They'll do it behind closed doors because players can't really get away with anything anymore. But I reckon go Alex Twal. Big Alex Twal to score a try. We might score a few on the weekend, so Alex might get his first one and go into a Tigers 13-plus win, and you'll get about 25-1 for those odds. It's a bit of an outside chance, but yeah, I think why not? But gamble responsibly there. That is my preview for the clash this weekend. I'm getting into the situation in terms of the mathematics and the ladder and all that. Yada, yada, yada. Next. Okay, so my last segment today, I'm going to explain in layman's terms as much as I can the situation in terms of making the top 8 for the Tigers with 2 rounds to go. And yeah, if you're listening to this, you probably won't be able to do it and not basically pause and let your brain catch up. But hopefully I've simplified the situation as it is. Now, of course, we are currently 9th, and there's 2 teams that we can jump. That's it. The Broncos, they're in 8th, and they're 1 point ahead of us after they had a tie earlier in the year. And then there's the Sharks, who are 2 points ahead of us and 66 points ahead of us in the for and against category. Now, simply put, if we win against the Dragons and the Sharks, Brisbane lose one of their 2 games. They're playing Parrot, Suncorp, and the Bulldogs at ANZ Stadium next week. And then the Sharks lose to the Raiders Sunday afternoon and then lose to us next week. We're in. Simple as that. In fact, we'd be 7th in that case. Now, it might not be as simple as that, and there are other less simple ways where we can make the top 8. So, firstly, for and against the Broncos is irrelevant. So, because they've had a tie, well, unless we have a tie. If we have a tie in the next 2 weeks, then that just complicates things. But if that does, and the outside chance that does happen, we are 20 points better than the Broncos. So a tie might not be the worst thing. It's better than a loss, put it that way. Now, if we win and the Sharks beat the Raiders, the 2 margins of us against the Dragons. Now, this is a bit of a head scratcher. So, the 2 winning margins of the Sharks and the Tigers against the Raiders, whatever the difference is there, will determine what happens to the 66-point difference for the game last round against the Sharks. Now, the beauty of the last game is for and against points count for double. So that helps us a little bit if it does come down to we need to beat the Sharks by a certain amount of points, which is what will happen if the Sharks do beat the Raiders on Sunday and we do beat the Dragons after. So for hypothetical sakes, let's just say we beat the Dragons by 1 and the Sharks beat Canberra by 1, or the margins are exactly the same. So that would mean that going into next week, we'd need to beat them 29 plus to overcome. So if we beat the Dragons by 1 and the Sharks beat Canberra by 1 point, that would mean we'd need to make up that for and against, and that would mean having to win 34 plus. So we don't really, 30 or 34 plus. Yes, that's correct. Because I'm not too sure what would happen if it was 33, but that's probably not likely going to be a winning margin. But if the Sharks do win on Sunday, yeah, we better hope it's not by much, and we'll be hoping basically, if that's the case, to really put some points on the Dragons. So say the Sharks just get a win by a point and we put 30 plus on the Dragons, then that kind of reduces to needing about a 19 plus, 20 plus win over the Sharks the final week, which is still not a situation we want to be in. And going into that game, needing more than just a win is not ideal, but that could well happen. Now, it is possible to make the top 8 and lose against the Sharks next week, and that's simply by winning this week and Brisbane losing their 2 remaining games. So they, as I said, play the Dogs next week, and they've got the Rabbitohs this week. So now our best case scenario is Sharks and Broncos losing this weekend, and then we beat the Sharks next weekend, as I said, and we move to 7th. So who does that mean will probably play in the semis? Now there's 4 teams that are contending for that 4, 5, 6 spots. So that's the Raiders, Manly, Rabbitohs, and the Eels. Now, the Raiders have Warriors at home last round, who will be playing for nothing. And because we're relying on Canberra to beat the Sharks to get in, you kind of have to assume that Canberra will win if we get in. So it's pretty safe to say we won't play Canberra, which is a good thing. So it's likely we're playing a team in Sydney. Now, the 4th spot is really close. That's between probably Manly and Souths, unless the Eels get their last 2 and Manly and Souths choke. Now, they're tied on points together, and they're only 19 apart. So 4th and 5th could be really, really close. And Manly have the Storm Brookie this week, and then they've got the Eels at Bank West to finish. So that game next week is going to be pretty big between Manly and Souths. Now, Souths have the Warriors in New Zealand, which they probably should win. And then the Chooks next week at ANZ Stadium. Now, you'd think they'd lose against the Chooks, but the Chooks pretty much are locked into 2nd place, so they might rest some players, and Souths could possibly win their last 2 games as well. But the Eels, they have the Broncos, of course, this week, which we really want them to win, and then Manly next week. So there's games, it's combinations, so many combinations where those teams could sit. Now, what would I prefer? The team with the least home ground advantage, you would probably have to say Souths. There's not a lot of home ground advantage when playing at ANZ, whereas playing at Eels in Manly or Parramatta is probably not ideal. I believe Manly would be allowed to play at Brookvale week 1 of the semis. I could be wrong about that, and correct me on Twitter if they do. But I don't think they force teams to go to the big stadiums in the first rounds anymore. I could be wrong about that. If that's the case, playing Manly outside of Manly might be the best equation. But I think South's at ANZ, and if we do end up playing South Sydney, that probably means they've lost a game or 2 and not in great form. So maybe that's a better scenario and better odds for us there. So on Twitter today, I made a call out to everyone to give me their predictions and tell me what they think will happen over the next 2 weeks. So here's what you guys said at Westlife Pod if you want to give us a follow on Twitter. Brad Hancock said, I'll save you the hassle and we'll finish ninth and miss out. And that's kind of where my head's saying as well, Brad. I'm just getting ready for another ninth placed heartbreak. Ethan Alvaro, he said the Broncos will lose. Sharks Raiders will be tight. So basically he's saying we'll probably go in the last round in the top 8 and then hope that Brisbane lose their games next week, or we get the win over the Sharkies to sneak in. Now, my boy Joseph, he said he reckons a win over the Dragons by 20 and then beat Cronulla, finish 7th, play Para at Bank West, which is, not such a bad situation there, Joe. Aaron Thompson reckons Sharks and Broncos lose. We win by 20 to 30, going to round 25 in the 8 and then beat the Sharks. And same as Joe said previously, he reckons we'll play the Eels at Bank West, but he, like me, is hoping we play Souths. Courtney, otherwise known as Lockie's mum. Now, she reckons her Dragons, she's a Dragons fan, she reckons they'll lay down for us and give us a good 30-plus winning. The Tigers will get the win, she reckons, for her young bloke Lockie and her husband Peter. And then she'll take the boys out to Leichhardt next week and hopefully get a big win against the Sharks to go into the top 8 and for the first time in 8 years. And please God, Buddha, Muhammad, whatever is out there, pray to absolutely every bloody deity that you can think of. Just let's get in there. But that's the show for this week, guys. Good luck to everyone travelling to the G on Sunday. So to reiterate, let's hope Broncos lose, Sharks lose, Tigers win, shut the gates, sold out Leichhardt Oval next week. That's the show for next week, and I'll see you next week. Bye for now.